Anyway, I threw it on the neighbor's roof. Hello and welcome to the QUACKCAST. This is QUACKCAST number 504. I'm Ozan Ocean, and with me is Baines, Tarns, and Pitface. Hello.
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 Okay, that's the all four of us, unlike last week. So the fridging wasn't permanent. This week we're talking about decompression, which is what happens when you've been like deep sea diving and you get up, you come up too fast, and then the nitrogen bubbles go out in your joints and you get the bends. No, this is about expanding stories beyond their limits. Yeah, well, not beyond their limits, but beyond the limits of the audience to keep their patience in some instances when it's decompressed way too far. But yeah, this is when you expand upon normally not trivial details, but you expand upon things that aren't expanded upon, and you extend certain parts of the story beyond what would normally be extended, and focus on things a lot more than you normally would, rather than getting into the action and super compressing stuff, which is what happens, in a very action-oriented story. So decompressed stories are that don't tend to be about action. But before we get into that, I have to bring up the featured comic. QUACKCAST gave us a feature this week, and it is called Jovian. So take it away, Kwai, with Jovian.
Hello, this is QUACKCAST, and the feature I've selected for this week is Jovian by Robert R. Veith, and it is rated T for teen. In the middle of a cosmic civil war, the unfavorable emperor's youngest daughter is injected with a shot of a chemical cocktail that would result in a cryogenic sleep. Only a single frigate ship was able to escape after the rebels attacked the Imperial Army. The inhabitants of that ship are now unknown. 70 years later, and a crew led by Captain Westervert is about to make acquaintance with a man who needs a ship, Lord Sar Tran Lu. All pages are full-sized and in color. The high attention to detail when drawing three-dimensional airships, robot mechas, and high-tech buildings is one of the most noticeable standouts in the comic design. This comic uses highly skilled traditional comic layout. Find out about the mysterious disappearance of the Emperor's youngest daughter and read Jovian by Robert R. Veith, rated T.
And that was our featured comic, The Jovian. Thank you very much for that, Kwai. All right, so next up we have the featured music. Gummalus gave this to me very speedily. The poor fellow, he had a cold and he couldn't think straight. He's been very sick. And I emailed him and said, Gummalus, are we going to have to do a best of Gummalus? And he said, oh no, just give me a sec. And he came back very shortly and gave me a theme to the Drunkduck Awards. So
cool.
That's an amazing result. So I would describe this as being, this is a bouncing party atmosphere. There's a familiar theme here to the fun and frivolity of the sounds, which fits with this being the representative theme for this great participatory community event at DD. You can just imagine all of the DD characters getting on the dance floor and shaking their stuff together in a riotous scene of dancing and celebration. So, take it away, Gummalus, with the Drunkduck Awards 2020. was our theme. The theme to the Drunkduck 2020 awards for this year that Gunwillis has given us. Nasia's doing that with the help of many fantastic community members, among them Tance and Baines and Pitt as well. Oh my goodness. There you guys. Okay, so uncompressed stories. Now, this is an interesting sort of thing. Stories that are decompressed or uncompressed, that they mean pretty much the same thing. So, what's an example of that? Tance, you were telling us a fantastic, gripping story about a woman emerging from a window.
It was a guy, I think.
A man.
But it was a woman. Yeah. A woman artist drew about 7 pages of this young man that opened, climbed through, and dropped out the other side of the window. 7 pages of this entire process. Yeah.
Now that's decompressed. So what we mean by decompressed is basically taking a long time to tell a story. And that doesn't mean you're telling the entire story either. It's usually you're telling a much smaller story and over a long period of time. Like, say you've got 30 pages for a comic story. Normally you might have, a bit of action happening and people going from here to there and meeting people and all this kind of thing. Whereas, very much a decompressed story, your characters might not even leave the room. That's what can happen in a decompressed story because it's so, things are so spread out that you can take your time to focus on character interaction and things like this, or even world building. So that's what decompression allows you. It allows you to slow down. You'd use decompression a lot of times. Maybe you're doing a special thing like Tance's window escape, and it's just a bit of a fun exercise. But you'll often use decompression to slow down the pace of a story and just to focus on one particular thing and really give time to build on that and the character interaction rather than, going full pace and telling, going through a plot. So plot's not really your focus in a decompressed story a lot of the time. What would you say to that, Baines? I mean, you're the guy who came up with the idea.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. I think decompression, just out of context, there's going to be hopefully a degree of, giving some breathing room. How much depends on what kind of story or what kind of scene you're doing. I would say that the big downside is if you're decompressing and it's filler in between, either you're cutting away to other scenes if it's some kind of subplot, say in a soap opera, where you'll have these little miniature cliffhangers for a year or something before you get to anything. But it's what is good pacing and slowing things down so to create anticipation or to focus on characters, that can be great. But then you have to watch out, are you drifting into just filler? If you have a bunch of filler before you get to the next plot point, it's kind of too much space in between we've talked about the kind of different plot and structure approaches. No matter what kind you're using, there's just too much space between any kind of movement.
Good point.
Any kind of plot kind of tent poles, So is it good character stuff? Is it important? Is it, or even just fun? Sometimes stuff is just fun. Fun being whatever tone or whatever emotion or whatever belongs with your story or your genre. Fun can be something horrific or something really sad, quote unquote fun, It's just you want it there because it shows details of the world or the characters. But that, if it's too much of that stuff, you have to be careful.
Yeah. As well, say, even from a writing perspective, you might, think, oh, I'm going to do a decompressed story. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to like focus on character. But then you find it's really boring as a writer, as a creator. And you think, my God, I'm committed to this now because, I can't speed up because that's the pace of the story and it wouldn't work. So I'm just stuffed until I can get through this part and actually get to some action.
And I would say usually if you're creating something and you're bored, that's probably a bad sign.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. I've been there.
Yeah. Same. Like, I think sometimes it can be a trap for a beginner writer to get stuck in a certain pace, or because like a beginner writer thinks, okay, so I've got a character here. How do I get to there? Oh, I've got to like go through all the steps. And so a beginner writer might just do a decompressed story because they really don't know about time skips and, like moving on with the plot. They're too focused on, okay, this character has to meet that character. And then what are they going to say? And, everything's very linear. So that's an example of a bad writer just falling into it.
I'm thinking, like, listening to James describe this particular type of pacing and writing, and I would say that I didn't think I would be using it, but I actually do use that a lot. Like, there are a lot of pauses, quote unquote, in the action to allow the character to develop before the next bout of action, so that the reader will know the headspace and the particular emotional and mental situation in which every character is going into the action that's coming. Otherwise, it could feel weird or disjointed, or people might not understand. And I'm not saying that people cannot understand. It's like sometimes if you don't get into the head of a character, or if you don't display certain situations that otherwise could have been swept to the backstage, let's say, then people will not be emotionally or cognitively cued in to the particular issues that will, hit upon the characters, and the characters are going to react a certain way, and blah blah, and so on and so forth.
That's what makes people care, right? It's the stuff in between the events. Like if we're talking more about an action kind of oriented story, like it's caring about the characters is essential. If everything is super compressed and it's written in a way where it's just event, like plot thing, then it can be very hard to care.
Like I'm thinking even for something like John Wick, I have only seen the movie, I have not read the comic. But before we get to action, and then again more action, we have this slow burn sort of beginning of him just enjoying being with his wife. Then his wife dies, and then he enjoys being with the dog, and he goes around doing stuff with the dog, and then we get into the action.
Right.
That was quite a decompressed beginning to that movie.
Yeah.
In Pinky TA, I like to follow the a sort of parabolic kind of curve for that. So I start off decompressed and slowly compress, and then when you get to the end of the story, things move apace. So I think that's a good rhythm to go.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
It's linear still, but it offers you a bit of variation in pacing. So I was just going to bring up the fact Inhabitants, which is a lovely story that Pitty's just starting, that has started off quite a decompressed story at the moment.
Yes. Hold on, sorry. I need to move my cat. Maui. Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, that fan's real loud, huh?
Maui is a beautiful black pussycat. Beautiful.
She's my baby. Don't look at her, I'll kill you. Yeah, it's starting off pretty decompressed. And I had to kind of almost fight I had to fight my urge not to do that initially, because for those of you who read it before, I had started the comic differently before, and it was starting from the point where the main part's going to pick up and Helmut's going to get his powers and all this kind of stuff. Uh-oh. Okay, never mind. Anyways, and I felt that it was just starting things off too quickly, and not for the sake of pacing, things that are more provocative always take longer. That wasn't necessarily the thought process, and restarting it and starting it from this earlier point. But I wanted it to be more decompressed, because so many things that I enjoy, like lots of horror things, for one, are oftentimes very decompressed. They're very times are also very simple, but they're not in a hurry to get you onto a million different points. And I think that that's useful in starting stories like this, and that we get to understand characters and their motivations a little bit better. Sometimes people say something shouldn't be in a story unless it's directly related to that story, and I don't agree with that so much. I think that's a very flexible thing to say. Like, there's a lot of different ways you can take that and make things, interpret things, whether they are related to a story or not. And granted, there are some times when that really does apply, like, hey, this didn't really need to be here, but I think starting the story over and starting it from earlier on, I'm trying not to say a ton of things that'll give things away. I think we're going to be able to not only understand Helmut's character a little bit better, like what will ultimately motivate him, but we'll experience it with him, and all of these changes and adversities that he's going to go through before he becomes that character in the bondage-inspired S&M kind of superhero outfit. Decided to put him in, and it's been the best life decision that I've ever made, and I'm so happy I can But what I needed to do, I realized, is to put in the work to get to that point, or else it's just going to feel like a gimmick. There wasn't going to be any substance behind it. It was going to feel like something that I would make and draw a few times and be bored with. Whereas making this, I feel so much more connected to it, and so much like it's everything about it now I love making. Everything about it. So it's been a big difference for me in going back and taking that time with the beginning.
I love the way it's playing out so far. Like these various I don't know if you'd call it point of view, but these camera angles, if you will, that sort of captures a moment. But then you stretch out the page really long, right? So gives you kind of more control of the pace. You can kind of as a reader, you can sink into it, and you're scrolling down this very long page, and like
Even
it really, I don't know, I find it really pulls me in. And then when something kind of shocking happens, so I won't say what happens a couple pages in, things are very quiet, and then something happens, it really like has an impact. So yeah, I'm
bigger
loving it
impact
so far.
because of it. Even Epic of Blitzov was fairly decompressed, but less decompressed than The Inhabitants.
Really? I feel it was. You know what? I see why you would say that. I think I feel it was less decompressed because I knew what was coming up in it. Or I feel like it was more decompressed. Wait,
Really?
am I getting myself confused?
More compressed?
It was. Why did I just go stupid all of a sudden? I'm trying to do two things at once, and I've forgotten how to think. Okay, so I think that it started to take longer to tell a story. That's how it felt. But I think that's because the things that I was planning on having happen. So I'll just say it, because at this point it's in indefinite hiatus. I need to just put that on my comic eventually, because it is. I might even one day just go back to it and start it over again, because I didn't think it through out super well, and it needs to be thought out better than I did. But basically what was going to happen is, we're introduced to how Blitzov has begun to take his mortality into account and think about death and to fear it, and what that means for him and all that kind of stuff. So I felt like I was taking that pretty slow. What eventually is going to happen, because he's got Excess with him now, and eventually what was going to happen is they were going to kind of go through this little mini journey together. And that I didn't have very well planned out, and that's where I kind of stalled just now. Well, not just now, but with my last updates. And after that little mini journey, so eventually that little mini journey was going to kind of end with Blitzov finally getting to the top of that mountain and seeing what the thing is, what the shiny thing is he's been trying to get to. And it was like an old world, like radio tower, and it's new technology for them. And, he's all excited. He's going to bring some of it back and stuff to study, and huzzah. And, so then eventually, they go back, and Exis is kind of giving him some fanfare and stuff. And they go back, and when they get back, they find that Bunkuria has been not destroyed, but is, I think, in the midst of an attack. And that's where we're gonna kind of pick up a bit. And I don't know, this explanation is very decompressed. But basically, I guess I felt like getting to that point was taking longer than it kind of needed to. I'm not sure. I'll have to look at it again one day, but so
you might want to change your pacing to just keep up with your thoughts about how fast you want to go and where you want to hit the next plot point.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, do you any of you guys find like you'd be racing through a story and you think, oh my god, this is like I really need to slow down here. I'm skipping ahead too fast, and I really can't. I'm not giving myself time to focus on it as a creator. I mean, I've had that a few times, so I've slowed down to decompress. I'll go on time.
I had it as a novelist, in the sense that I have this trilogy, high fantasy, that I technically have completed. But the thing is that the third book races through the most important part, because I wanted to get to the final showdown that exists in the third book, which is extremely important for many reasons, from my existential and political to, life and death, because it is a war within a war within a war, basically. It's like a babushka of wars in that particular story. Like the entire trilogy is this girl that gets in unknowingly in the midst of a secret war, then the war becomes overt, and then this war becomes like collapses into, or erupts, from depending from your point of view, from the way you look at it, into a bigger and more substantial war. So I want to get to that particular part in the third book, where everything comes into this big showdown. And I realized that, okay, I rushed through too many things, and I have to take it slower so that the characters can organically develop and get to that point without all of them rushing through different stages that probably would satisfy the audience. I don't think that they would feel that anything was rushed, but I didn't have the time to show the society also shifting and morphing together with them, with all the differences and the like huge disruptive and transformative changes taking place. So it felt a little bit disjointed and too fast, like I was fast forwarding through things, which is not what I do in all the other parts. All the other parts speed up when they need to, and they slow down when they need to. So now I am rewriting that. Fun. Joy.
That actually reminds me of a famous book series by Robert Jordan. That was his name, his pen name at least. So he wrote the Wheel of Time series, which is a fantasy that a lot of young adults liked. And so this fantasy ended up like, I don't know, maybe 7 books long or something, and they were big books too. Like each book was like 500 pages or 600-700 pages. It's ridiculous. And you might think, oh yeah, a lot of fantasy is done in gigantic series. That's how they do them, with these huge books and stuff like that. But the thing was, after about the 3rd book or something, they became incredibly decompressed. So he was just filling space. So in terms of his writing for those books, rather than, going too fast and needing to focus on character, I think he very deliberately slowed down in order to just create more volume. So he knew he had to, this was his meal ticket. He became incredibly successful with his series, and he wanted to produce, the full 7-8 novels or whatever that it's going to be part of, and make those sales. So he wanted to fill the space. So you have characters going, oh, girls are bad. Like, girls, I can't understand them. I can't understand girls. It's just, oh my God. It's just, they're doing my head in. And the girl's going, boys smell. Boys are just naughty. Boys are just, they're, yeah. And it's just, oh my God, this is inane. And this would be pages.
Sounds good. I gotta read these books.
Yeah, and then you read another book and the characters are still doing the same. Girls are this and boys are this, and you think, you're like a 50-year-old, 60-year-old man at this stage. What the hell are you doing? Writing about girls and boys, teenagers with their problems. You as a writer should be way beyond that. But yeah, that was the reason I stopped reading it. So I can't tell you how that series ended because I was too irritated. So my point of view
boys and girls are bad. Okay.
They're bad.
It's a much loved series. I don't know. Go on, Tan. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to finish the trilogy as it should. For me to feel that I haven't, done them wrong, all these characters, because I love them. but I wanted to finish because I have something else that I want to write that's
Yes.
coming up, and I want to write that. So I have to finish the other one.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'm in a happy, quote unquote, position not to need to stretch a book into many other books. So there's that at least.
Yeah.
But
I'm
yeah,
glad you're doing that. I mean, I haven't read the book yet, the books yet. But I mean, novels overall, they can be fast paced and very compressed stories, but novels are kind of the major. I mean, now we have miniseries and stuff, Netflix series or whatever. But novels for a single story, that's the place where you can decompress and you can see this point of view and that point of view. Have a chapter about, what's going on in the larger world or somewhere else. So, I mean, that's kind of like an advantage
oh,
of a
absolutely.
novel, Yeah.
But even then, I mean, you have to know when to stop decompressing.
Oh, yeah. People
Like
can still get bored.
Yeah, absolutely. But also you need to know it's like in cooking. You need the salt, but too much of it is going to ruin the food, and that goes for everything, I guess, in life. So yeah, decompressing is absolutely necessary for immersion purposes, I think, and for the the audience, like the reader or whoever is consuming the art form, to actually have the chance to identify with the main characters and to at least realize the stakes and realize the motivations and realize the emotions and everything that goes into whatever the characters do or don't do. Moving on to the action. And especially when you get to areas that might not be very familiar to the audience, like for example, in fantasy and in world building, you might need to decompress to give the feeling of what it means to be in that world before you go on into more complex interactions in that world, and so on and so forth. And same goes for when you present a culture that is alien, or at least is alien to the average viewer or reader. You need to decompress to allow them to immerse into this new thing that they have no real exposure to before.
Actually,
And then you can
I
build
was
up.
just gonna say, like, now you bring up that point of like letting people live in the world a bit and experience it. Some writers are so good at that you wish they would just continue doing that for a lot more and not getting into the pace of the story, because sometimes the pace of the story is not that interesting. It's just, the tropey and cliche to cliche, but their writing to immerse you into the world is the really interesting part. So that
Yeah, that'll make it not cliche, right? If you can see the details a little bit, and you're like, I want to know more about this or that.
Exactly, and those are the kind of worlds that are so successful, I think, because people will talk about those as if they're real, and people will want to get more into that part of the story, which can be interesting. Well, you look at Tolkien, for example. So I don't think he was the best writer ever, but he was a good trailblazer. So that he did an amazing lot of world building before he even created that world. And so you start off in Lord of the Rings in Frodo's, Bilbo's, whatever, I think it's Frodo's little house or whatever, the people meet up.
Hobbit.
Yeah, hobbits and so, you get a bit of knowledge about that stuff, and that's another story that sort of gathers pace. It's more of in a parabolic curve, like I was saying with Pinky Tear. You have a slow beginning and it picks up, but you do get a nice view of the world. And by the end of Lord of the Rings, people were quite hooked on that story and wanted to know more about the world. So that's why Tolkien produced some more bits and pieces. Well, I think his publishing company at that stage sort of collected the works and produced them so people can live a bit more in the world. And then you read the Silmarillion, and then you realize, oh my goodness me, this is not a world so interesting to live in anymore, because this is as boring as arse.
Which actually brings me to another thing. Decompressing so that people can immerse into whatever it is you want them to immerse means that you probably need to pay attention to show things organically rather than tell them that this is how it's done or this is how it is, and which is something that even master authors sometimes do. I always have my example of Victor Hugo, who literally pauses the story to talk about the Parisian sewers and the sewage system in Paris,
Typical
like a
French
lecture.
person.
Yeah.
He stops the story to give you a lecture on architecture, basically, and sewage. But which, of course, is not the way to do it, and you don't really need that. And I have to say that in my first reading, because I was warned about that, I just skipped the entire chapter and continued, and that was the best first experience of Les Miserables. But that said, there are so many other parts in that particular book where everything is in such high relief that you feel how it is to be in the underprivileged classes and having to deal with all the problems that they are dealing with in that particular era. And that is done because you see it happen before your eyes. You are not told. Like you are told sewers. So yeah.
Well, it's the same thing.
And it's not about seeing every detail, like every single detail of the world. That's on a slightly different subject, I guess, and a different kind of skill or whatever to work on, is to have the details that are relevant, or at least somewhat relevant to the story you're telling, as relevant as possible, even if it's not directly connected to the protagonist and exactly what they're doing. It's it's relevant to whatever conflict is going on or whatever. It matters. Whatever details you're doing matter. It's not showing every bit of research.
Yeah, like
and another thing that you can do, which can give a lot of depth and the feeling that the world is actually very well lived in, is that instead of actually telling people about the minute stuff that you have researched and you have added to your work, then they are not actually directly relevant, but you can use them in dialogue and have people naturally allude, not mention them, just allude to certain things happening because of something that is given, that is a norm in their society, and just have people acquire it as they would if they were, going through the marketplace in that particular society and what they would see. Like, for example, if you have a shower or running water in your privileged areas in your world, whereas the other areas do not have it, then having the character be impressed that someone could take a shower because he cannot or she cannot will just get across the thing that you want to show without actually
explaining.
And explaining. Let's just have them say that, wow, okay, see, you can do that, and you are so lucky or whatever. Like
They react to it.
Something. Yeah. And
It
then
feels
move
more
on.
organic.
Yeah, it's organic.
Mhm.
Well, it says Jules Verne did the same thing in 80 Leagues Under the Ocean, or whatever that book is. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. You've got
That's the prequel.
Yes, actually. So that's a fun kind of exploration of the undersea world and the idea of submarines, before that really existed. And we're getting this lovely tour of how this stuff works, and it's amazing electronically powered, stuff, and it's got lights and all this stuff, and he's explaining that, and that's fun, and it's contextual, and like you're talking about, it fits. Like, oh wow, and this is how that works. And then we get a not an excellent description of Ned as he goes. He's all dressed up in his undersea scuba gear, or whatever you call it, like deep sea diving gear, and he's going out and he's exploring the bottom of the ocean, and we get this very boring, dry description of every single sea creature he sees on the way. Oh, and then there was this fish, and that fish, and this fish, and this fish glowed, and this fish did that, and it's like, Jesus, Jules Verne, just get to the next thing. It's just a description of everything he saw. It's like Jules Verne one day went to the National Aquarium in Paris or something, and then saw every single fish, and he just decided, I'm going to put all of them in the book. All of them.
I know all these names. And that part of the book was adapted into a Dr. Seuss story later.
Yeah. Oh, and another thing that you can do by, in a sense, including the action and not exactly decompressing, but decompressing for one purpose that you might need, and then using that experience to advance more stuff later, perhaps, is how your characters would think about some particular element that you want to include, then cannot otherwise be included without exposition and stuff. For example, you want to talk about prejudice, let's say, in your world, or in that particular era or whatever. You can have people factually talk between them and present to the audience a particular impression as fact, and then later you can present this particular thing as not being that, and clash with the impression that the audience has through the eyes of the people that have the particular, prejudice, or the particular bias, or whatever, or what have you. Which is something that I always love to play with. Oh, so and so is this and this and that, and then we meet this so and so, and he's not this and that, and that will give the audience not only the impression like, oh my God, okay, so these are biased. There are these biases, and now I am experiencing them, and I know that they exist in this particular world in very different ways. So
you expose an unreliable narrator, maybe.
Yeah, and then your decompression will not only have served whatever purpose you needed it for in that particular stage where you had it, but it will keep, giving fruit, if you like, later on as action is happening, and you have these layers of experience that you give to your audience, which is another thing.
Yeah, well, you build on the groundwork. Yeah. You lay a solid foundation, and you build on it, and it reaps the rewards. Plant the seed, and then you reap it.
Yeah. Like for example, we went through a very tedious scene, a very painful scene of an execution without moonlight. That happened in a very specific way, and it still is a very raw subject. But apart from the reasons that I have it in now, it is going to come up later, fleetingly, in very different contexts. And that is, I hope at least, is going to demonstrate political nuance for a lot of stages within the development of history as it goes on. So there are a lot of reasons why we went through this before. So.
I definitely wouldn't. I read that and I would not use the word tedious. Definitely not. That was like gripping. You were focused on like character and like made me feel like I don't necessarily want this guy to die. It's like makes you feel very conflicted and kind of sad for the guy and everything. And you're seeing it through Fotis' eyes, but even like I don't want to spoil too much, but but it was that was powerful stuff. It's because it's through characters. It's not kind of dry detail and historical kind of encyclopedia entries or something like that. It's like very emotional, full of conflict.
And it's all the more impactful because like if you would have just had a scene where like, oh, there's a guy getting executed, oh, now he's executed, let's move on, oh, Fotis is crying, why? Like if it wasn't decompressed, it wouldn't have nearly the impact that it does now, but you took the time to make all of those reactions in the crowd and the guys doing who are deliberating the execution and the guy himself and the mother in the crowd and Fotis's different reactions and stuff, and taking the time to decompress and show all of those things is what made that scene, rather than it just being a snapshot about an execution that we would forget down the line. It's it's a part of the story that if you were to ask people, I think even a few years from now, depending on what other things you write in there, but if you ask people few years from now, like tell me the things that you remember most about Without Moonlight, I imagine that's a scene that would come up quite often.
Oh, thank you. That makes me feel better. It was very hard to make. Only that. That's why this came to my mind, because it was extremely painful for me, and it took a lot of energy to make. But I'm really glad that it had this impact, because then it's doing what I needed it to do, and it means that I will not need to decompress for certain other parts that are coming at all, because just one line in dialogue will get the effect across. Yeah. And that's investment. Part of the investment, not all of it, but part of the investment that this scene carried. So I'm glad. I'm really glad. Thank you, guys.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah,
I could imagine a scene like that having like a hyper focus on the actual physical, like the blood and guts of it all. You think of like excruciating detail, like a different way someone could have done that scene, and that would be very hard to look at. Yeah. And it would be like, it's like, it's horrible, and it's, I guess, powerful in a way, but it would be like, you wouldn't want to look. You'd be like, I can't read this. This is too much.
I wouldn't be able to draw it, to be honest. I'm not that, I don't have that kind of stomach.
Right. Oh.
Yeah. That was a very intimidating scene. There's a lot of intimidating scenes in Without Moonlight that focus around death. That's surprising. There's a bit of a theme there.
Who would know? Who would guess? But that just comes up out of nowhere in that particular era.
Yeah, well, you've got, let's see, first Anna gets killed. That's a shocking, well, these are spoilers, maybe I shouldn't say. So, there's that one there. I'm not going to enumerate them, but there are some very shocking scenes focusing around. Yeah.
Thank you. I take that as the highest compliment, and thank you.
yeah, that's a good thing to be making your story so memorable because of that. And it's interesting that sometimes you speed up and slow down around those particular points. Like you're not always taking it at the same speed. I remember when the situation happened with Basil, that was quite compressed scene.
Yeah.
It was very compressed. You know, getting photos back was incredibly compressed. And then, yeah, that thing happening with Basil was quite compressed. But afterwards, then it was a bit decompressed. So, yeah, you gave us a chance to sort of reflect and focus.
A morning period.
The idea, a lot of the stuff, the approach, I guess, that I have in Without Moonlight is that action might happen lightning fast, and then the impact of it might hit you like a couple of clicks later, in a sense. Like when you fall down and you feel that something is off, but the pain doesn't hit you immediately, because a lot of things can happen extremely fast, and things can change extremely fast. And I didn't just do that because I think it's cool. It's because all of the accounts of survivors of that era stressed, and I was actually very impressed about that. They stressed a lot about how things could happen extremely suddenly when they were, like, you had this decompression, let's say, and then you have a spike of action, and then things have changed suddenly. So I wanted this to be the feeling that exists in the comic, because that was the experience that on the average I heard coming out of all the accounts, no matter what they were talking about. That it happened suddenly, it happened intensely, and then everything was different afterwards. Right. So that's why.
Yeah, it's a very realistic depiction in that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like the way we take in information. That's an interesting thing. Do you know why? Okay, there's the phenomenon of thinking time speeds up and thinking time slows down. And when you're younger, time seems to last forever. And when you're older, time speeds up and up and up. This is like the subjective impression people have of time. And the reason actually is, you know, whenever you think the time slows down, is simply your brain is taking in way more information in that instance. Like when you're young, you don't know anything. Like you don't know anything about the world, or literally you just don't know all the stuff. So instances they seem to take a long time, because your brain is like taking in all the information about everything. It's all new to you. So that's why you get bored very easily as a child, because your brain is like receiving all this information about every single, you know, situation. So you're excruciatingly aware of it. But when you're older, what happens is you already know all this stuff. You've been through all sorts of situations, so your brain doesn't focus on any of that stuff. So your brain's not focusing on where you are in the, like, situationally all the time. You're not like focusing on every single second of time that's passing by. Your brain's just going, oh, I'll just ignore that because I already know all this stuff. So that gives you more time to sort of, you know, think about your own thoughts and stuff like that. Your brain is not like excruciatingly aware of your environment. So when you're older, you don't get bored as easily because, you know, you're not, your brain's not being tortured by the unbearableness of reality. And this is what happens when you are in a fight or flight situation. Your brain, you're being flooded with noradrenaline and things like this, and your brain is focusing on your environment, trying to work out a way of escaping a situation, something like that. So time seems to slow down, but in reality, time doesn't. Time just goes along at the same pace always. But yeah, so you can imitate that effect in comics or in stories, in books or whatever, by slowing the story down, decompressing. And that it can be a very effective technique to mimic those situations, like in Pitface's example of The Inhabitants. Things are happening quite slowly, and the kids are experiencing digging holes and all this in the ground and all that kind of stuff. And like that experience.
I love that there's not much to say about it right now because it's just starting off, and all we can take for it right now is the kids are digging holes.
But the thing is, those experiences of childhood that you have of, say, digging a hole or something like that, that seems to last an eternity when you're, like summer holidays, holidays when you're a child. It's like, oh my God, this is just forever. Like 4 weeks holidays, just, oh my God, this is an eternity.
Yeah.
But when you're older, 4 weeks holiday is like, oh my God, like that's going to be over like this.
And I think time, the expression of time when writing comic books, when writing anything, but, us four work on comic books, is really important in the medium, especially if you're compressed. Well, no, either way. I mean, there are so many different ways that you can use panels and arrange pages to express time. Because the way we read things, the way your eye goes from panel to panel varies according to like the detail in it or how large the panel is, where it falls on the page. Like if there's a bunch of tiny panels in a row, and they've got compact information on them, it's going to feel like things happening within those panels is happening in a very short instance of time. Whereas if you have big, long panels and, your eye gets time to kind of scroll through them, and especially if there's more dialogue on them as well, it's going to feel like it's taking a longer period of time. And that's one of the reasons why, again, I really love using the long page format for this, because I feel like it allows me to play with the passage of time a bit more malleably as compared to when I was just doing regular standard comic size pages. And I can utilize that scrolling more in order to kind of make the reader feel what's going on more. Like in that first panel that I have that opens up the story, and you just keep on scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and the sky's changing colors, and then you get down to the house and stuff, and I don't even think you're aware you're looking at the sky at first, but I think even just the gradual change of color through the scrolling conveys through the reader, that I hope anyway, that it conveys to the reader that you're just kind of falling into the story now, and you're taking time to kind of be transformed into this world. And it's kind of like it's designed to kind of slow down time for you in order to go into the story, if that makes sense, and not too much up my own ass.
No, it's good. It's working.
Yeah, it is.
You know how to draw too. That helps.
Thank you.
I kept following the page down when I first read it. What's that? Sorry.
Oh no, I was just being stupid. I said I asked my mom to do it for me.
She knows what she's doing. I suspected. Wanted to see if you'd keep taking credit for your Ghost Artist work. But yeah, it's working.
Thank you.
Yes, it's very effective. Well, we have sort of had a very decompressed QUACKCAST this time, and we
No, I'm depressed.
we have reached the hour mark pretty much, so perhaps we should wrap it up now, guys.
Revels now have ended.
Mhm.
Ba, 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 ba.
Very
We are all sufficiently immersed. Now we can go on into action.
Yay!
Woo!
I was going to ask, like, I know Pip plays like story video games. I was going to ask how all this works in a game, like the pace and the immersion and like the, all that kind of jazz.
I don't play them. I just kind of watch them because I don't have anything to play on or time. But it is interesting to see the way that video games do it. I don't know. I'd have to think more about that, quite honestly. Maybe, I don't know, if we want to talk about like game perspectives and stuff, it might be cool to have an actual gamer on or something, because as you're playing the game, like you're in the story, I imagine it's different,
Right.
Yeah. I think also that we would need an actual gamer. And does any one of us actually play games?
I used to.
I've been playing Digdug.
Digdug.
Online.
Master of Tetris.
The last game I remember playing is Crash Bandicoot 3 on PlayStation 2.
That's a pretty good game to talk about. So yeah, that's not bad. All right.
No, it's not. It's very old, I guess.
yeah, it's old, but it's got the structure, which is the important thing. Well, thank you guys for listening to QUACKCAST 504. I'm Ocean, and you've been fantastic.
Thank you, folks.
Bye-bye.
Yourself as well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.